I'm going to put this werewolf in here with you all, and this werewolf is going to eat you one at a time, night after night. Hello, welcome to my channel, and welcome to my YouTube project, Makeup and Middle-earth Monday, a show where I do a makeup look and talk about a topic that I picked out from the Tolkien Legendarium. Today, I'm going to be talking about Finrod Felagund, one of the kings of the Noldor elves in the First Age. He's widely regarded as one of the most noble, all-around good dudes in the Tolkien Legendarium. If you're familiar with The Lord of the Rings, but not with the Silmarillion, Finrod is actually Galadriel's older brother. He was also the first of the Noldor elves to encounter the first men. This week's makeup look is going to be a tiefling look. A lot of people requested this from my first video, but it kind of got outvoted by the Halloween look, which I feel like is intensely valid since that video was intended for October 31st. But now that we're in November and there's not like a holiday, I'm doing the tiefling look. This character is a bard alt for the LARP that we go to that I am going to be bringing in during the summertime, which is why I look like a weird pirate, I guess. You know, I made this, which is, you know, I guess kind of impressive, but, you know, also not really, because I just threw it together. I will be posting a list of the products that I used in the description box below. This one is kind of an experiment. I haven't really done a makeup test for it yet, so we'll see how it turns out. Anyway, so Finrod was a Noldor elf. This is the same kindred of elves that Elrond and Galadriel are from, but it's a different kindred than like Legolas and Thranduil and Celeborn are from. If you remember Celeborn, that's Galadriel's husband. I know he's like furniture in the movie, but you know, he is around. He's a cinder elf. But that's another video. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going into the Noldor family trees or like the different kindreds of elves just because like I feel like I need a chart for it, and it's really just it's kind of complex if you're not already familiar, but essentially what you need to know is that like the Noldor elves were really into smithing and lorecraft and that kind of thing. They liked to learn new things, and they liked to make cool things, and that's more or less what they were about. Finrod, the subject of this video, was about like, you know, he liked treasure a lot, I would say. Like, I think his city that he ended up ruling eventually was known for having like quite a bit of treasure, but we'll get to that. Finrod himself was born in Valinor, the Undying Lands, in the Years of the Trees, in Eldamar, which is one of the places that elves lived in Valinor. The trees in question for the Year of the Trees, if you are unfamiliar with the Silmarillion, they were kind of like, they were the light source before the sun and the moon were the light source. But when they existed, they kind of only illuminated Valinor. They didn't really do anything else for Middle-earth. It was just Valinor, and then Middle-earth was illuminated by starlight more than anything. This is already turning out terribly. Yeah, the rest of the world had starlight. The two trees, the first one was Telperion, and this was the tree of like soft silver light. So you could consider it the equivalent of like the moon. And then the tree of the sun was Laurelene, and she was like the brighter color tree. They would each wax and wane in a cycle, again, kind of like the sun and moon. And they were created by the Vala of living things. And if you remember, the Valar they're not gods exactly, but they were the ones who kind of intermediated between Eru, the one god, and like the rest of creation. So you could consider them like angelic beings, but the one who was her dominion was living things. What her name was Yavanna, and she's the one who created these amazing trees. She also made the Ents, fun fact. These two trees that she made were pretty much the dopest shit ever, and they were so cool that she probably couldn't remake them ever again quite as awesome as they were when she made them the first time. You know, if you're like an artist who has ever put your heart and soul into something, I'm sure that you can probably empathize with that. But this is just context. You need this for context. Like I said, I don't really want to go super into like the lineages because I really feel like I need a chart to like explain this kind of stuff. But basically, so Finrod is the man of the hour. This is his episode. His uncle Fëanor was an amazing craftsman of the Noldor elves, and he discovered a way to capture light within a vessel, like a gem, or if you remember the file of Galadriel that had the light of their most beloved star in it, that's a craft that these elves can do now thanks to him. He was a huge dick, though. Like, let's not mince words about that. He was a huge dick, and he knew he was super duper talented, and he was not afraid to remind everyone else around him how super duper talented he was. But he, you know, crafted these gems, 3 perfect gems, perfectly flawless, beautiful, and he captured the light of these 2 amazing trees in those 3 gems. And these 3 gems were called the Silmarils. That's what the Silmarillion is named after. And these gems were pretty much so amazing that literally nobody could shut the fuck up about them for like centuries. They were so friggin' cool. Everyone wanted them. But like Fëanor would not let anybody touch them. They were his. And he would wear them on like around his head just to be like, yeah, I made these. None of y'all can touch them. Ha ha ha. They were so awesome that the Vala who kindled the stars hallowed them after they were made so that nobody who had committed evil deeds could touch them without being burned. So if you were a bad person and you tried to touch them, they would literally burn you. So, honestly, like, you know, at that point, I don't understand how fucking Fëanor could touch him because he was a fucking dick. But, yeah, so they were so awesome that everyone wanted them. I guess that's kind of the Reader's Digest version of that. They're very much tied into, like, the fate of the Noldor elves, and especially the fate of Finrod. So, okay, I am going to have to get into, like, some of the family stuff. I'm going to try to make it easy, because Lord knows the only reason I understand any of this is because I spend way too much time thinking about Tolkien. That's why I made this show. But anyway, yeah, so Finrod's father was named Finarfin, and he was one of Fëanor, the man who made these Silmarils. He was one of his younger half-brothers. They had the same father, Finwë, who was the first High King of the Noldor, so like when the elves were first created, Finwë was one of the first elves to like wake up and realize that he existed, I guess, is the best way I could explain that. But yeah, so his first wife was Fëanor's mother, and he remarried after having Fëanor because his first wife passed away. That's a whole other thing I'm not going to get into this episode. But he remarried, and the lady that he married the second time was a Vanya elf. And the Vanyar were elves that, I don't know, I guess, like, It's easier for me to tell the different kindreds of elves apart because they all have different hair colors, essentially. So the Noldor elves have dark hair, the Vanyar elves are blonde, and the Teleri elves have silver hair. So Finwë marries a Vanya elf lady named Indis, and he has two other kids with her, Fingolfin and Finarfin. So Finrod's father, Finarfin, was the youngest of the three brothers that were born to Finwë, and he passed his golden hair on to all of his children, including Finrod and Finrod's younger sister, Galadriel, whom I'm sure that most people know who that is at this point. Finarfin married Eowyn of the Teleri elves. The Teleri were most, like I said, they're most known for their silver hair, and they loved music. They were super into music and singing, and they were also like really into making boats. They were very, very good at crafting boats, and so like they lived like along the coast. So I guess you maybe you could consider them sea elves. I guess I don't know. So, like I said, Finrod was the eldest son of Finarfin and Eowyn. He had two brothers, Angrod and Egnor, and one sister, Galadriel, whom you may have heard of. He also had a love interest, Amarie. She was also one of the Vanyar elves, and I guess I'm gonna do like the Reader's Digest version of how like all of the drama got started. I mentioned the Silmarils already, just kind of to drive the point home, but these gems were like seriously amazing. They were so beautiful that like so many people wanted them, including Melkor, or Morgoth, whom you may remember from my episode about Sauron as the original Dark Lord. But like during the time frame for the beginning of this whole saga, Morgoth was still going by Melkor because he was like pretending to be good. The Valar let him live in Valinor at the time, and he was kind of just like pretending to be helpful when in reality he was trying to sow discord and make everybody think that the Valar were like holding the elves captive and forcing them to like stay there. I don't know why you would feel like you were being forced to live in paradise where everything is awesome all the time, but I'm not an elf, so maybe I'm just not in the know. But eventually, his plans do come to fruition, and he steals the Silmarils. In the process, he murders Finwë, the High King of the Noldor, and Finrod's grandfather. In during this, he also, Melkor, has a direct hand in the destruction of the two trees, which is really devastating for everyone because, like, these trees were, like, seriously so cool. But he gets the help from this like spider demon Ungoliant, and Ungoliant is like one of the, she's like the ancestor for Shelob, if you remember Shelob from the Lord of the Rings. She's like her ancestor, but she basically like sucks all of the life out of the trees and eats their light, which is, you know, not cool. But yeah, so they do that, and they steal the Silmarils, and they murder Finwë, and then they run away and escape to Middle-earth. And the Noldor, led by Fëanor, pursue them. So the pursuing elves in this situation we can kind of break up into three categories. There was Fëanor's group, who were the first group. They were ahead of everybody else. They got to the harbor where the Teleri elves had their boats, and Fëanor was basically like, hey, give me your boats because we're trying to go after Morgoth because he stole my shit and he murdered my dad. And the Teleri are like, man, sorry, that really sucks. I'm sorry that happened to you, but we're not giving you our boats. And he's like, well, why not? And they're basically like, look, we put our heart and soul into making these boats. They're like our pride and joy. If we give them to you, we don't think that we'll be able to make them again as awesome as we made them the first time, which is, you know, kind of a recurring theme, because that's how Fëanor feels about the Silmarils, and that's how Yavanna felt about the two trees. So, but, you know, obviously, instead of being an empathetic person and being like, you know what, that's fair, I guess we'll just have to figure out another way to do it, Fëanor is like, well, y'all, I want your boats, and if you're not going to give them to me, I'm going to kill you. And so that's what he does. He starts killing all of these innocent Teleri elves to steal their boats in order to pursue Morgoth, who stole his. So this is essentially what triggers the first kinslaying. This is a really, really, like, really dark chapter in elvish history, I guess is how I should probably phrase that. But yeah, so in the middle of this fight, while they're murdering all of these innocent Teleri elves, Fingolfin shows up with the second part of the Noldor host, and he is basically like, these Teleri are fighting my older brother. I need to back him up because something has gone wrong. So he just jumps in with his army, and they also start helping kill these elves. And he doesn't know, like, you know, if you show up to a fight and, like, your best bro is getting wailed on by, like, a bunch of dudes, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna ask if your bro is right or wrong? Or are you just gonna, like, jump in and be like, hey, stop hitting my bro? So that's essentially what, you know, Fingolfin did, and not great judgment on his part, but, you know, of the two, one, you know, I would say he had a better judgment than Fëanor does. So yeah, you know, they kill all these elves and they take their boats, and then by this point, the third part of this group finally shows up, and this is Finarfin's company, and with Finarfin are his children, and they have no idea that the kinslaying has just occurred. Like, at least, like, from my perspective, they didn't really know that this is what had happened. So they show up and they're like, okay, well, we're here. And, you know, it took them longer to get there because they had the largest group of people who were going. And they kept stopping to look back at the city they were leaving behind because they didn't really want to go. But, you know, Fëanor is the new High King, and he was, you know, somehow he managed to be pretty persuasive in order to getting all of his people to follow him. But they didn't really want to go. You know, Finrod didn't really want to go. Like, he left Amarie behind because none of the Vanyar elves went. She was unwilling to leave, so he had to leave her behind. You know, that is kind of lame. It's very sad. But, yeah, so they get there. They don't really know what's going on. They didn't realize the kinslaying happened. It's just kind of like, oh, Fëanor's group has boats. Cool. So they travel north, and it's at this point that something called the Doom of Mandos happens. And for context, Mandos is the Valar that deals with the dead. He watches over the halls of Mandos is what it is, and that's where elves go when they die. Some elves are allowed to reincarnate and come back to life, or re-embody, I guess. I don't know, like, they come back as them, but alive, even though they died. It's kind of rare. Like, it's only something you get to do if you really earned it. There's not a whole lot of named elves, I guess, that were given this honor, so it's not, like, super explained, but basically, they receive this prophecy, this doom from Mandos. And it's a really long and awesome quote that I can't read on this show because the format is really not conducive to me reading long excerpts from the books. But, like, it is a really cool quote, and I do recommend, like, reading it if you are able to, because the prose is really beautiful. But the gist of it is that this doom was proclaimed for the Fëanorians who had participated in the kinslaying, and they were banished. Like, the ones who actually participated in the kinslaying were banished from Valinor. They were no longer welcome there, and they more or less were doomed to have kind of like all of their undertaking fail. There's an oath that the sons of Fëanor are about to take, you know, in a little bit here that really is not good for them. And this Doom of Mandos is basically like, you're about to take this oath, and this oath is gonna f you up for the rest of your time in Middle-earth, and then when you die, you're gonna be dead. You're not gonna be welcome back. You're gonna be stuck in the halls of Mandos, and that's just that. Is basically like I said, the Reader's Digest version of this prophecy. And a lot of the elves from Finarfin's company are like, well, fuck that, we didn't do anything, y'all are on your own, we're gonna go back. So like, Finrod's father, Finarfin, repents, and then a lot of their company also repents and is like, we're just going to go back to Eldamar. So they leave. But, you know, Finrod's kind of like, Finrod didn't really want to go, but all of his friends wanted to go, and he didn't want to, like, leave them at the mercy of Fëanor. He didn't want to leave them basically at the mercy of a madman. And I know I sound like a hater. I don't hate Fëanor. It's just that he makes a lot of really questionable decisions, especially when he's angry. And these decisions often have like really far-reaching consequences. So like, I don't hate the player. I just hate the things that he decided to do. But yeah, so they follow, and you know, in following, essentially that means that they put themselves into this Doom of Mandos situation by, like, even though they didn't participate in the kinslaying, they still followed Fëanor. So they still, like, went along with it in the long run. I feel like we should probably also keep in mind that the kinslaying was probably like super traumatic for Finrod, like when he found out that it happened, because like these are his mother's kin. Like his mother is Teleri, so these are his mother's family. The elves, like, I know they live a really long time, but they don't really procreate at like a super quick rate. So like he probably knew some of these people personally that Fëanor murdered because they were his kin. Like he was related to them. But you know, the Noldor still want to leave, so they like head further north where the crossing is going to be a little bit easier. And so Fëanor takes the people that he trusts. So they cross, and then his oldest son Maedhros is like, okay, cool, so are we going to send the boats back? Because like we left all of our cousins and uncles behind. And Fëanor is basically like, no, we can't trust them. Burn the boats. So they burned these boats that they murdered a bunch of people to get. And as soon as they burn them, like Fingolfin across the ocean knows what's up because he's an elf and he can see the boats burning. So he knows that they've been betrayed, and he's like, man, you, like, I was gonna do what you wanted to do, and this is how you repay me. So the only choice that they have is to cross the Helcaraxa, which is this like horrible northern route that is basically like an ice glacier desert. So Fingolfin has to lead all of the rest of the Noldor across the Helcaraxa. It takes them, I'm gonna pause for effect here. It takes them between 20 and 30 years to get to Middle-earth. They lose, like, so many people in the process because the crossing was just so dangerous. Finrod has a cousin named Turgon. I don't think they share a birthday, but they share a birth year. They were very, very close. They were like BFFs for a while. So Turgon's wife is tragically killed in the crossing. Like, there's an accident. His wife ends up getting like trapped in ice, and like they can't get her out before she freezes to death. So that sucks. And he never marries again, obviously, because a lot of, like, not every elf, but a lot of elves, it's like, you know, they marry for life. So, like, if they lose their life partner, then that's it. And that's incredibly sad. So, it takes them, like, decades to cross this horrible, icy wasteland. This looks terrible on camera, but trust me, it looks even worse in the mirror that I'm working on right now. So yeah, takes them like 20 to 30 years to cross. When they finally get there, they find out that Fëanor is dead already because he did like some dumb Ares bullshit and like tried to fight like 5 Balrogs at once and they killed him. So they get there. He's dead. His sons have sworn this horrible oath, essentially, which is they're gonna get these Silmarils back, and they don't care who they have to kill to do it in the process, basically. The who they have to kill in the process, essentially, is like anybody who has a Silmaril or anybody who tries to take one and like keep it from them, they're gonna kill them. This is the oath that they swear when their father dies. I'm sure this won't ever cause problems at some point ever. Spoiler alert. It actually causes a lot of problems. So they get to, if you're not in the know, the area of Middle-earth that they reach is called Beleriand. Beleriand is the landmass that's on like the westernmost side of Middle-earth. If you've never heard of it before, it's because it's not there anymore. By the time the Lord of the Rings happens, it doesn't exist anymore. But the arrival of the elves after their journey through the Helcaraxa is what begins the First Age. The first moonrise happens, and this is when we begin a period of time called the Siege of Angband. And Angband is Morgoth's fortress in like the northern part of Beleriand. It's like in a mountain range with these gigantic mountains that he made to be like super duper annoying because Morgoth is super duper annoying. And the elves just can't figure out how to get into Angband to like get him out so that they can beat the shit out of him. So they're kind of like, okay, well, I guess we'll just fortify our position, I guess. And this is the point where Finrod decides to build a watchtower to just keep an eye on Angband. And if you watched my Sauron video, the watchtower is called Minas Tirith. It's on this isle of Tolsirion. And it's not the same Minas Tirith as the one in the Third Age. It's a different one. It's just because a lot of places named in Elvish are named after what they're described like themselves. And Minas Tirith just means Tower of Guard. So like this tower was guarding Tolsirion so that they could keep an eye on Morgoth and Angband. That's why. He constructs that like really early into the First Age, and then sometime after completing that, Finrod and his cousin Turgon, the poor man who lost his wife to Fantasy Antarctica, they're traveling south along the river Sirion. They make camp, and the Vala of the Waters, Ulmo, comes to them and kind of like gets them in like a deep sleep. And he gives them both this prophetic dream that essentially motivates Finrod and Turgon both to start looking into constructing cities in order to fortify themselves against Morgoth. Because he comes to them and he's basically like, my dudes, it's gonna be real bad. Like, when he eventually comes out, like, yo, it's gonna be so bad, it's gonna suck. You guys really need to make some sort of fortified position for your people, or it's gonna be bad. And, you know, great plan. This sounds like a great plan to me. But they never actually told each other about the dream. Like, they both had this dream. They never told each other about it. They just they just assumed that they were the one that he came to. So they built completely different, like, secret cities. Turgon ends up going on to create Gondolin, which is the city that the elfish, like, craftsmen were in, who made Bilbo and Frodo's sword Sting, and they made Glamdring, which is Gandalf's sword. From the swords that glow blue come from Gondolin. That's not what Finrod did, though. Finrod made Nargothrond. And so, like, after, you know, this camping trip with Turgon, Finrod eventually goes to visit Doriath with his sister Galadriel. And Doriath is the city that King Thingol rules over. And if you weren't aware, there were already elves in Beleriand and in Middle-earth, like, before the Noldor, like, returned. These are the Sindar elves. And like I said, I don't really want to go super into the different elven kindreds in this video, because it's kind of, you know, a whole thing on its own. But Thingol is the king of the Sindarin elves, essentially, and therefore, like, since he's been there this long, he also could probably be the High King of Beleriand. Finrod and Galadriel go visit him, and while they're there, Finrod is like, yo, this city's dope. I would really love to make something like this. Do you have any ideas? And Thingol is like, yeah, there's this place, like, you know, around here called the Narog, and there's like a bunch of really cool caves there because Doriath is an underground city. So Finrod goes to check out these caves that Thingol recommended, and he really likes them. He thinks they're really cool, and he decides that he's going to build his city there. He actually enlists the help of the dwarves to build this city that he wants to build called Nargothrond. You know, Finrod's like a super cool dude, so, like, if you hear about, like, elves and dwarves, like, not really getting along, that's not the case with Finrod. Like, he's a super nice guy, and he's very respectful to the dwarves, and, you know, he pays them with these, like, super dope gems that he brought over from Valinor. And they love these gems. So they are like, yeah, man, we'll help you build this cool-ass city under the ground. And when they finish, they end up actually making a necklace for him called the Nauglamir. The Nauglamir makes like a few appearances here and there in the Silmarillion, but this is where it got its start. It was given to Finrod by the dwarves for being a cool dude and having like some nice shiny shit that they liked, essentially. But they also gave him a nickname. Kuzdul, I think is the language. It is Felak Gundu, which means maker of caves. And this gets cinderized as Felagund. So afterwards, Finrod was typically referred to by both names, Finrod Felagund. So, like, if you see articles about him online, sometimes they just call him Felagund, or they use both names. This is where it came from. So, after the completion of Nargothrond, Finrod passed Minas Tirith into the care of his nephew, Orodreth, and Orodreth held it for, like, a few hundred years. Nargothrond, as a realm, extended all the way to the sea, and Finrod actually also helped Círdan, who was the lord of the Thalas at the time. These are the Teleri, the area that the Teleri elves who didn't return to Valinor lived, and he helped Círdan also build a watchtower in the Thalas, so that they could keep an eye out if, like, Morgoth was going to try to make a sea attack. He never did, but, you know, that was cool of Finrod to do. So this watchtower was called Barad Nimras. Yeah, about 300 years after that. This is, I guess not a lot happened in these 300 years, but 300 years after that is when Finrod encounters men for the first time. He's out hunting with his two cousins, Maedhros and Maglar. These are the two elder sons of Fëanor. They're, like, the less assholey sons of Fëanor. And eventually he is kind of like, yeah, I don't want to hunt anymore. He gets tired. So he just kind of wanders off after, like, hanging out with these two sons of Fëanor for a minute. And he sees this light, and he's like, what's that? So he goes to investigate, and it is a campsite. And in this campsite, he finds men from the House of Beor who have, like, kind of started immigrating over to this part of Beleriand. And, like, he's never seen men before, but he's like, these people are really interesting. I wonder what their deal is, you know, and he's just enchanted. So he, like, goes into their camp, and they're all asleep, and he just kind of walks around and looks at them, and then he sees a harp. And he picks up this harp, and he sits next to their campfire and starts playing it. And as these men, like, wake up from their slumber, they think they're still dreaming because they've never heard music this beautiful before, and they've never seen, like, they've never seen someone like Finrod before, so they're just like, yo, are we dreaming? Like, is this dude a god? Like, what is going on? And he ends up making friends with all of them, and he spends like years with these people, just like learning their language, teaching them Sindarin. Finrod, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Galadriel, you know she can see into people's like minds and hearts, and he had the same ability, which helped him learn their language more easily, I would venture to say. Eventually, he decides to bring them with him to talk to King Thingol, because the green elves in this area, they don't like the men there. They're afraid that the men are going to destroy their homes and their forests, and they want them out. So he takes them to Thingol and is like, hey, I found these guys, like, can I find somewhere for them to settle? And Thingol lets him take them to this area called Estelad, but Beor himself decides that he wants to come and live in Nargothrond with Finrod, like as his vassal, I guess. So he ends up going with him to Nargothrond, and he actually lives out like the rest of his life there. He serves as like a vassal and a loyal friend to Finrod until like his 90s, when he finally passes away just from old age. And I imagine that this kind of perplexes a lot of the elves in Nargothrond, because they've never really encountered men before, and they don't really understand how mortality works. So the men really like Finrod. They think he's really cool. He teaches them a lot of neat stuff, and this is how he gets one of his epithets, Nom, which is a Mannish word for wise. So Nom, like Finrod, Nom the Wise, is a thing. During this time, like this 400-year siege on Angband has still been ongoing, mind you. So the elves still can't get into Morgoth's fortress, so they kind of, you know, they're still trying to fortify their own positions and prepare for him, like, eventually to attack. And during this time, like I said, Beor passes away from old age, and Finrod kind of strikes up a friendship with this lady named Andrith, and she is a human. She is also one of the men of the House of Beor, but she's a wise woman, essentially. And there is this essay, I guess you could call it, that Tolkien wrote that is essentially a conversation between Andrith and Finrod. And it's, I don't know, like, maybe experimental is a good word for it, because it's very much like Tolkien is careful to frame it in a way that the things said in it are from the perspective of the two people holding the conversation. But they essentially talk about, like, spirituality, their views on the afterlife, like, why men and elves are different, you know, and she is kind of bitter, and I feel like rightfully so, but like there's depth to it, and the history for it is essentially that when she was younger, she was in love with one of Finrod's younger brothers, Aegnor, and she wanted to marry him, and he wouldn't marry her. He left, and she thought that it was because he thought that he was superior because he was an elf, you know, and he thought that men were not as good. But really what it was that they didn't know when the siege on Angband was going to end, and elves have a custom where they don't marry and they don't rear children during times of war. So he didn't want to lead her on, so he left so that she could live, you know, her own life. And that was essentially like what Finrod explained to her. Like, okay, yeah, so like 400 years into the First Age, maybe like 40-ish years since Finrod's conversation with Andrith, the Dagor Bragollach happens. This is the Battle of Sudden Flame, when Morgoth finally breaks the siege on Angband after 400 years. And like, I talked about it a little bit in the Sauron episode, but the Dagor Bragollach is basically Angband opens up, lava pours out, orcs pour out, monsters pour out, Glaurung, the first, like, the father of all dragons, comes out and starts ruining people's lives. And the elves are really unprepared for this, especially for, like, you know, the lava that comes out of it. But yeah, the elves are really unprepared for it. A lot of people die. A lot of people die. And Finrod is like, oh, hell, all right. So he brings some reinforcements from Nargothrond with him in an attempt to help his allies because they're on fire. And he ends up in the fen of Serich, and I don't know how he gets there, but he gets cut off from, like, the majority of his own forces that he brought with him. And he's, like, surrounded by orcs, and he's about to die. But who should show up but the men of the House of Fëanor to save him? And they are led by a man named Barahir, who is the great-grandson of Beor. I think I did that math right. But yeah, so they show up, and essentially they make, like, a wall of spears around Finrod so that he can escape back to Nargothrond, and they took heavy losses during this battle. Like, this rescue is really what, like, forged, like, really fortified his friendship with the House of Fëanor. So Finrod swore this oath of friendship with Barahir after this battle, and he gave him his ring as a token, and basically was like, if Barahir or any of his descendants should ever require aid from Finrod, then he would help them. He would do anything in his power to help them. And this ring that he gave him became known as the Ring of Barahir, and it is two serpents with emerald eyes, one devouring and one wearing a crown of golden flowers. And if this sounds familiar to you, that's because this ring eventually becomes one of Aragorn's heirlooms, like one of his family heirlooms. So now you know where that ring came from. And now this is also when Tolsirion fell to Sauron after the Battle of Sudden Flame. He takes Minas Tirith with an army of just awful creatures. Orodreth and his men are forced to flee south, and Sauron sets up shop in his fancy tower that Finrod built like 400 years ago, and he changes the name of it to Tolan Gawroth, the Isle of Werewolves, and he holds command there, reading werewolf. Oh, yeah, good. Now, see, I have my hair there, so I don't have to put makeup on my ears. I don't know if you knew this about me, but, like, I hate putting makeup on my ears. It's just a thing I don't like doing. And then, I think it's, like, maybe, like, 10 years later, Beren, Barahir's son, actually comes to Nargothrond to collect on Finrod's oath. Beren has fallen in love with Luthien, who is, I would say, maybe perhaps the most beloved and beautiful of pretty much all the elven maidens ever. She's actually the daughter of Thingol and a Maya named Melian. Melian is a female Maya who was in Middle-earth for, you know, quite some time, and she ended up meeting Thingol. They fell in love. Beautiful. I'm going off on a tangent again, I'm sorry. Basically, what you need to know is that Beren and Luthien were in love, and Luthien is the daughter of King Thingol. You may remember the King of Beleriand, and was the one to recommend the area that Finrod built Nargothrond in. Unfortunately, though, Thingol is a little bit of a racist. He pretty much laughs Beren out of Doriath for asking to marry Luthien, and is like, sure, you can marry my daughter. Only if you bring me a Silmaril first, though. And keep in mind, at this point, that the Silmarils have been in Morgoth's crown, and are still there, and have been there for like 400, 500 years? I don't know, a long-ass time. Nobody's gotten any of them, and this is a suicide mission. It's a suicide mission, and it's an insult. And Beren is pissed at, like, the disrespect, basically. Like, this was incredibly disrespectful of Thingol to treat him this way. And he is, like, out on a mission to essentially be like, well, fuck you, I'm gonna do it now. And when I do it, you're gonna eat your words, aren't you, old man? So he leaves Doriath out for blood and goes to Nargothrond to seek an audience with Finrod. And Finrod talks to him and is basically like, look, man, you don't want to involve yourself with the Silmarils. The oath that the Sons of Fëanor swore is no joke. And, like, no good can come from this. But I gave you my word, so, like, I'll still go with you if you ask me to, but I'm just telling you, man, like, no good can come from this. And Beren basically shows him the ring of Barahir and calls upon him to honor his oath. And Finrod does, because he is a man of his word. And up until this point, two of the sons of Fëanor have been living in Nargothrond with Finrod, Celegorm and Curufin, who one could argue are like the two biggest assholes in that family. And we're gonna go into it a little bit here, but like in the Beren and Luthien episode, we'll go into it a lot of it. But they're basically like, well, hey, you can't go and get a Silmaril. That's our thing. But we don't want to go because we're scared. So what they do, instead of being reasonable people, is they go and they start, like, persuading people not to go with Finrod to go help Beren. So, you know, and by persuading, I mean they, like, threaten to kill them, I would think. And so when Finrod eventually is like, yo, I need some warriors who are, like, cool to come with us, only 10 people are willing to go, and this is like a whole city. Finrod is the king of this city, and no one wants to go with him. So he gets angry and is like, man, y'all suck. I am your king, and I gave my word. Fine, okay. And he takes off his crown and basically just throws it on the ground and is like, F all of y'all. If you're, like, too chicken shit to go, fine, I'll go, and I'll keep my word. Stay here and rot in this safe city that I built for all of y'all. So they leave Nargothrond, like, not before one of the faithful people, like, persuades Finrod to, like, give his crown to somebody trustworthy who can, like, hold on to it until he comes back. So he ends up giving it to Orodreth, his nephew, again. Hopefully this time nobody shows up to ruin Nargothrond's day. But they leave Nargothrond. Finrod, there's Beren, and then there's like these 10 dudes who decided that they were like cool enough to come with them. And Finrod, like, there are some elves that are they're just gifted with foresight, so they just kind of know what is coming. And so he knows, like, he has a pretty good idea that going on this mission is gonna be the last thing that he does. But he goes anyway because he gave his word, and he promised that he would help, you know, anyone from Barahir's family who asked him for help. So he goes, and, you know, they all set out for Angband, and along the way they find a company of orcs and they kill them all and steal their gear. And they put on the gear. Finrod does this like sick elf magic thing and disguises them all as the orcs that they just killed so that they can hopefully sneak into Angband without, like, being noticed. And they make it a good ways north, but they are spotted by Sauron from the nice shiny watchtower that he stole from Finrod. And he captures them and brings them in for questioning because he sees these orcs traveling across his area without, you know, they're not checking in or, you know, anything like that. They're just booking it. And so he takes them in for questioning and is like, what are y'all up to? And they won't tell him. So, and you know, they're disguised because Finrod used his magic to disguise them. So Sauron is like, all right, if you won't talk, I'll make you talk. And he and Finrod get into what I like to call the bard battle, because Finrod is a bard, and I guess so is Sauron. Finrod is an extremely powerful and talented elf, and he has, you know, elf magic. So he puts up, like, a really good fight, but in the end, unfortunately, he does lose to Sauron. I said earlier that the format of this show is not like super awesome for reading lengthy excerpts. So I do encourage you to look up like the full text because it is a very beautiful prose. And I mean, I know I say that about everything because I just really love Tolkien, but like it's beautiful. And I said that I can't really read like an entire text format to you because I have to put makeup on my face, but I'm gonna read like a little bit of it just so that you can like grasp the scene. So the excerpt is this. Then the gloom gathered, darkness growing, in Valinor, the red blood flowing, beside the sea where the Noldor slew the foam riders, and stealing, drew their white ships with their white sails from lamplit havens. The wind wails, the wolf howls, the ravens flee, the ice mutters in the mouths of the sea. The captives sad in Angband mourn. Thunder rumbles, the fires burn, and Finrod fell before the throne. And that's from Canto 7 from the Lay of Leithian. Essentially, he loses to Sauron because Sauron invokes the kinslaying on him. Sauron doesn't know who they are, but the doom of Mandos is still in effect. And even for Finrod, who didn't participate in the kinslaying, he was still guilty, like, by the rules of the doom of Mandos because he still followed Fëanor after they were like, you have to turn back or we're never going to let you come home. So he's a nice guy. Like I imagine that he feels incredible guilt over the fact that the kinslaying even happened, even if he wasn't directly involved. So sadly, he does lose this bard battle to Sauron, and Sauron is able to strip the magic that is like holding them that way, but he's still not able to figure out who they are. So he's like, all right, well, tell me who you are, and none of them will do that. Like they're all loyal, faithful bros, so none of them tell Sauron who they are. And he's like, okay, fine, don't tell me who you are. I'm gonna put you in my dungeon of this nice tower that you built. Thanks, bro. And I'm going to put this werewolf in here with you all. And this werewolf is going to eat you one at a time, night after night, until one of you tells me who you are. And the werewolf eats them one at a time, night after night. But none of them tells Sauron who they are. So, I mean, man, that must suck. Like, can you imagine, like, these 10 dudes who were faithful enough to come on this suicide mission, pretty much knowing it was a suicide mission, but, like, I don't imagine any of them realized they were going to get eaten by a werewolf. Like, you don't even get to turn into a werewolf. You just get eaten by one. That's lame. But, yeah, so they all get eaten by this werewolf until it's just Beren and Finrod left. And this time, the werewolf comes for Beren. As it is about to end his whole career, Finrod uses the last of his strength, breaks the chains that are binding him. Mind you, they're all in the dungeon, in the dark, buck-ass nude, because Sauron took all of their shit. So he breaks the chains holding him, tackles this werewolf, and fights this werewolf with his hands and teeth. Like, the actual quote from the book is he fights it with his hands and teeth. He punches this werewolf to death, and in the process, he is mortally wounded. Finrod is mortally wounded while he is fighting this werewolf to get it away from Beren. Kills this werewolf with his teeth and his bare hands. What a metal way to go. Like, I think that's probably one of the most metal ways that anybody has gone in Lord of the Rings. But yeah, so he fights this werewolf and kills it with his bare hands, is mortally wounded in the process, and then tragically he passes away in Beren's arms in the dungeons of this tower that he built himself. So I'm sure that irony was really, that I'm sure he really appreciated that irony. He tragically does die in tower that he built, and the tower is torn down. They bury him on the hill in Tolsirion, and his body actually like purifies the island after, Sauron ruined it. I really like the quote for when he dies, and it's I'll read another one. I have a couple excerpts in this episode, I'm sorry. But the quote is, "Thus Finrod Felagund, the fairest and most beloved of the House of Finwë, redeemed his oath." If you know me, you know I love good boys who die for their ideals, and Finrod Felagund, without a doubt, is like the best that Elvenkind has to offer. Certainly the best the Noldor have to offer. When Finrod died, he was 2,381 years old. This was 465 years into the first age of Middle-earth. So, elves live a long time, man. Because of the way elven immortality works, like, we don't really know where humans go when they die, but we know where elves go when they die. They go to the halls of Mandos, which I talked about earlier. And sometimes these elven spirits are permitted to be re-embodied. And I think I said you have to be, like, super special awesome to be re-embodied. But luckily for Finrod, he was super special awesome because of his valorous deeds in life and the fact that he was just like such an all-around good dude. They actually let him come back, and he came back like pretty quick after being dead. Like he came back pretty quick. So now he's actually like chilling in Valinor with his dad and with his lover Amadie. They were able to be reunited, and I think that's pretty nice. Presumably they're still waiting there for when Galadriel comes back, and Finrod and Amadie waited for each other for like almost 500 years, I think. So they're living together now in paradise. Good for them. Since I have a little extra time, this episode actually ended up going a little bit quicker than I expected, but I guess like while I'm finishing up the makeup, I'm just gonna go into my own personal opinions, because I know that's what you watch this show for, is my opinion. But I really love the character of Finrod. I think that he is not only one of the best characters in the Silmarillion, but I think he's also like one of the most important characters in the Tolkien Legendarium. Like, he's this beautiful embodiment of really, like, the best that the elves have to offer. And to me, he represents, like, the ideal, like, the best an elf could be, what they often fall short of. He was genuinely a good person. He was an asset to all of the people who lived around his realm. He was an ally to everyone. He was genuinely a good man who wanted to protect his people. He wanted to help strangers who needed it. He wanted to do the right thing. He kept his word. And these are all character traits that are really highly valued in the Tolkien Legendarium as well. Someone who has a sense of honor and responsibility. And it's a world that exists with the promise that even when evil takes root and even when terrible things happen to good people, there are still going to be people willing to do the right thing, even if it costs them everything. And I think that's really important, and that's really something that we as a society need to help us also try to be better people. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. I'm gonna put my horns on now that I'm a demon. Yeah, no, if I pull my hair down, you can't see the fact that I didn't do makeup on half of my ears. Also, hopefully these lights wash this out enough that you can't tell that the makeup doesn't really actually match the ears. Now that we've reached the end, I hope you've enjoyed our time together, but even if you didn't, I appreciate you giving me the chance. I appreciate you watching this far, especially if you didn't like it. This must have been a real rough ride for you. But thank you for making this journey with me. Now that we've reached the end, it's time for a segment that I like to call Metal Music Monday. This is where I recommend a song from my metal library, and maybe we like the same music, maybe it's new to you. Either way, I hope you enjoy it. The song of the week this week is The Black Halo by Camelot. I mentioned them briefly last week. They're one of my favorite metal bands. I've been to see them live. I would really like to have the chance to go see them live again. But they're a power metal band. The song follows pretty nicely after the one that I recommended last week. And I'm putting this all into like a playlist. So that's all. If you made it this far, let me know by writing WWEJD. What would Elf Jesus do in the comments? Thank you. Sorry I'm so chaotic.